Hey everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into the smoky, bustling world of a medieval tavern, the heart of every village and town. Long before electricity or warm showers, this was the place where farmers, merchants, knights, and travelers all gathered under one low, timbered roof. So, before you get cozy under that warm blanket, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if what I do here genuinely helps you wind down at night. And hey, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it right now? There's something oddly soothing about knowing there are others awake with us, wandering through history together. Now, dim the lights. Light a candle if you have one, or just let the soft glow of your skin draw you in. Close your eyes slowly, and let the noise of today fade away. You're stepping into a world of creaking floorboards and flickering hearthlight, where the smell of sweat, smoke, and spilled ale lingers thick, and where the endless work of the tavern keeper begins as the night stretches on. You wake with a grunt, throat dry and back aching from a night spent half-slumped across a bench, a wool blanket doing little to keep the chill from your bones. It's still dark, pitch black outside save for a strip of moonlight slicing through the cracks in the shutter. Roosters aren't crowing yet. The drunks in the loft above are still snoring, one of them punctuating the quiet with a wheezy snort that sounds suspiciously like a dying goat. But you've been up longer than the birds, for as long as you can remember. The tavern never truly sleeps. And you barely do either. You swing your legs over the side of the bed, really just a pile of hay sacks with a burlap sheet, and wince as your bare feet meet the cold-packed dirt floor. There's already a dampness to the air, and the fire in the hearth long ago turned to a ghostly scatter of gray ash. You shuffle toward the hearth, shaking your legs into yesterday's hose and boots, still damp with spilled ale. You poke at the coals with a blackened iron rod and offer a half-hearted prayer to any saint who might be listening. Please, just one ember. A dull orange glow winks back at you. Good. You won't have to start over with flint. You set to work, feeding the fire with splinters and shavings, then a few arm-thick logs you've been drying behind the bar for a week. They hiss and pop as the flames wake up. The light flickers up the soot-streaked walls and dances across the ceiling beams, every one of them blackened from years of smoke and candle wax, bent low enough to knock the sense out of any traveler taller than a church bench. Once the fire is alive enough to breathe on its own, you head to the cellar, damp, rank, and full of secrets. You pass the trapdoor behind the bar and ease down the wooden ladder, the cold closing in around your shoulders like a wet cloak. Your breath steams in the dark. The barrels sit in rows like fat, sleeping monks, banded in rusting iron and smelling of old hops, wet straw, and rot. You tap one gently with your knuckles. Still firm, still sealed, you thumb the lid of the nearest ale barrel and take a cautious sniff. The scent hits you with sour yeast and wet wood. Could be worse. Could be vinegar or dead rat. You've had both. You draw a ladleful and hold it up in the lantern light. Murky, dark brown. Still drinkable. Barely. Back upstairs, the tavern's main room is beginning to warm with the fire, and you prop open the front shutters just enough to let the dawn peek through. The world outside is just waking too. Cobblestone streets glistening with dew, the blacksmith 2 doors down already hammering at something. Probably his own nerves. You pour a half mug of ale and take a sip. Bitter, but familiar. It'll do. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is stale rye and cold onions. You chew with the same enthusiasm you reserve for unpaid debts, then start hauling out the day's work. Benches need mending. Pewter cups need scrubbing. And there's a suspicious stain near the hearth that you swear wasn't there when you closed up last night. Blood? Wine? You've stopped guessing. By the time the first customer arrives, usually old Marna with her basket of eggs and a gossip streak sharper than any dagger, you've already boiled water, wiped down the tables with a handful of damp straw, and scattered dried herbs across the floor to cover the stench. Lavender, if you're lucky. Mugwort, if you're not. Marna grunts her good mornings and exchanges 6 eggs for a ladle of yesterday's pottage. No coin changes hands, rarely does. Your ledger is filled with strange trades: a duck for a night's lodging, 3 potatoes for half a jug of ale, a prayer for credit. You don't believe in prayer much anymore, but the duck laid eggs, so that's something. The day wears on slowly. The sun creeps through the windows, stirring up dust motes in golden spirals. You sweep, you stir, you curse the flies. Midday brings a few laborers, muddy, grumbling, loud, and they want ale. They always want ale. You serve them in cracked mugs and try not to flinch when someone starts singing. Singing leads to shouting. Shouting leads to chairs thrown at walls. You've learned to smile just enough to keep things civil, but not so much that they think you're weak. By now, your shoulders ache from hauling logs, your hands smell of onion and ash, and there's a burn mark on your thumb from where the kettle spat back at you. You haven't sat down once. You won't until long after dark. Still, there's a kind of rhythm to it, a worn, familiar hum beneath all the sweat and smoke. This tavern is yours. The fire obeys you. The barrels answer to no one else. And when the world outside turns cruel, and it always does, there's comfort in knowing the hearth still burns here. You made it burn. The sun is sinking low again. Candles need trimming. The woodpile is almost gone. And you swear you just heard a rat skitter beneath the floorboards. But you're not done. The real night hasn't even begun. And you? You'll keep going. Because the ale needs brewing. And no one else is going to do it. You rise before the cockerel crows, rubbing your eyes with flour-dusted knuckles, the scent of dried barley already thick in the air. The hearth hasn't been cold for 3 days. Not since you began this particular batch. Needs tending again. You're bone-tired, with splinters in your fingers and ashes on your apron, but the ale won't brew itself, and if it spoils, well, you'll be drinking bad water or worse. They all think it's simple, don't they? Just a bit of grain and water and time. Let it sit and boom, beer. But those people don't run taverns, and they certainly don't have to explain to a brawling table of travelers why the ale tastes like old feet. You pull the lid off the vat, the wooden planks creaking with steam and anticipation. The mash is thick and frothy, thank the saints. No green fuzz, no sour tang. You've had batches go bad fast, especially in summer. You never really know until it's too late, until the foam bubbles the wrong way, or the village priest comes down with fever and everyone starts whispering about witches or demons, or your brewing pan not being clean enough. The basics? Barley. You soak it in water till it starts to sprout, then dry it. Sounds easy until it rains for 5 days and your malt turns to mush. You've done this part on the roof with a cloak over the grain to keep the birds off, cursing at the sky like a mad shepherd. Once the barley's ready, you grind it yourself, because no miller in town cares whether it's fine or rough. You mix it with water and let it stew. This is the mash, the warm, bubbling heart of your tavern. Then you drain the liquid, the wort, and boil it. And this is where it gets tricky. You don't have hops, not unless a traveling merchant is feeling generous. So you use grute, a strange, bitter mix of herbs. Yarrow, bog myrtle, wild rosemary if you're lucky. If you're not, you find yourself scraping tree bark and hoping it doesn't kill anyone. The boiling takes hours. You stir with a paddle almost as tall as you are, sweating beside the hearth until your sleeves soak through. If you leave it unattended, ash will blow in, or a mouse, or a spider. Who knows what crawled in last week and made old Agnes hallucinate half the night? She called you a sorcerer. You gave her a free bowl of broth. Then there's the yeast. You don't call it that, of course. You call it the god stuff, or barm, the pale foam you skim from one batch to seed the next. It lives in the air, or so they say. Sometimes it appears. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the ale ferments in a day. Sometimes it takes a week. Sometimes it sits still like a corpse, and you wonder if the saints have turned their faces from you. Once, the fermentation failed completely. You served the batch anyway, too poor not to. 3 men got stomach cramps so bad they soiled themselves on the rushes. One claimed to see the Virgin in your chamber pot. You dumped the rest behind the pig pen and told everyone it was penance. That's the thing, isn't it? Ale is safer than water, but only just. The local well, full of worms and gods know what. The stream, tainted by the tanner's runoff. Your ale? Boiled, fermented, strong enough to kill most things living in it, except for the occasional bit of mold, the rare spoiled herb, the invisible curse. Still, people come. They come for a tankard of something warm, something bitter, something alive. You serve them with calloused hands and a forced smile, eyeing their faces after the first sip. Are they smacking their lips or spitting? Are they wobbling because they drank too fast? Or because the batch is bad? If it's a good brew, the coins flow. If it's a bad one, the rumors spread faster than the rot. That's when the guild might pay a visit, or the reeve, or worse, a traveling monk with a nose like a hound and a list of sins longer than your bench. One time, the bishop's steward stopped in. He sipped your ale, nodded, and paid in silver. You were proud, until the steward keeled over in the street an hour later. Turned out it was bad eel pie from a cart down the lane. But for 3 days, no one drank from your tavern. You slept beside the cask, whispering prayers, just in case. You've lost count of the barrels you've brewed, but everyone is a risk. Everyone might be the last. And yet, it's your lifeblood. Your ale is your offering to the town, your shield against illness, your gift to the gods of trade and survival. Without it, you're just another widow with a room and a cold hearth. As you ladle some of the warm wort into a cup to cool, you sniff it once, then again. Slightly sweet. No bitterness yet. That'll come with the herbs later. You'll pour it into the fermenting vat and wait. A day, maybe 2, maybe more. Then, if fortune favors you, you'll have ale. ale strong enough to dull pain, wet dry throats, fuel stories, and, most importantly, keep your tavern doors open one more night. And when someone staggers in from the road, soaked to the bone, muttering about bandits or plague or their long-dead mother, you'll hand them a mug, warm and bitter and barely safe. They'll smile. You'll nod. Because in this world where everything can kill you, your ale might be the one thing that doesn't. You start stirring before the sun even thinks about rising. Your shoulders ache from the chill, your fingers stiff as cold iron, but you reach for the ladle anyway. It's hanging where you left it last night, crusted at the edges, with dried broth and whatever that grayish clump was. You scrape it clean on the rim of the pot with a grunt, just in time for the morning pot to bubble up from the ashes of yesterday's fire. The stew's already started. It never really ends. You call it stew, but that word's doing a lot of heavy lifting. In truth, it's more of a liquid memory. It's yesterday's pottage mixed with the bones from 2 days before and thickened by whatever the boy brought back from the market this morning. A turnip, half chewed by worms. A heel of bread that's mostly mold. Some greens, vaguely green. And, miracle of miracles, a bit of salted meat. Pork, you think, though it smells suspiciously like shoe. You drop it in anyway. There's no real recipe, just a rule. It must be hot, and it must not kill anyone important. That's the secret of a successful tavern kitchen. Keep the knights upright and the friars fed. If a peasant gets a bellyache, well, no one counts that. You work in silence, interrupted only by the fire's hiss and the sound of dripping. Rain again. It's always raining in this part of town, or at least it feels that way. You cover the pot with a cracked lid and check the side dish. Another mush of peas and barley, boiled until it's more glue than food. The consistency is solid enough to patch a roof tile. You know because you've tried. There's no seasoning. Spices are for the nobility. Cloves, cinnamon, pepper. You've sniffed a clove once, many years ago, when a traveler dropped his satchel open near your counter. You still remember it. Warm, sweet, strange. But in your kitchen, seasoning means salt, if you have it, and the occasional wild onion you dig from the mud behind the pig pen. The first customers shuffle in around dawn, laborers mostly. Mud-caked boots, chapped lips, hollow eyes. They take their usual place near the fire and nod in your direction. You ladle out the stew without a word, slipping them hunks of bread that you softened in the broth, cheaper than making fresh loaves. The trick is soaking the crust just long enough that they don't notice the mold or the weevil holes. You don't smile when they thank you. You've learned not to smile too much. It leads to conversation. Conversation leads to requests, and requests lead to debts. You've already got too many. A knight arrives by mid-morning. You recognize him immediately. Chainmail, wide stride, the faint sound of jingling coins somewhere on his person. He smells like horses and wine, which is a marked improvement over most of your regulars. He slams a silver coin on the counter, which is enough for stew, bread, and a cup of ale. You give him double portions of everything and pray your meat was, in fact, meat. If he ends up vomiting in a ditch, let it be someone else's ditch. You serve him your best bowl, the least chipped, recently rinsed, and only slightly scorched. He doesn't seem to care. He eats with gusto, tearing into the bread and slurping down the stew like he hasn't had anything hot in weeks. You watch from the corner of your eye, wondering if today is the day your mystery pottage finally ends someone. It isn't. Not today. The stew smells the same as it always does. A deep, earthy aroma, rich in root vegetables, faintly sour, vaguely metallic. You've come to associate the scent with life itself, the way fire smells of safety, and how moldy linens smell like home. The tavern carries that scent in its bones. The tables are steeped in it. The walls breathe it. The floor creaks beneath it. Sometimes you wonder if the stew is what holds the whole place together. At midday, the back room begins to fill. Carpenters, smiths, a toothless widow who pays with eggs. You serve them all, quick and quiet. Your ladle, rising and falling in rhythm like a monk at prayer. Some ask what's in the pot. You always answer the same. What's good? It's better than the truth. Because the truth is, this stew has included everything from squirrel to pigeon to something you're pretty sure was ferret. Bones get boiled clean, scraps get chopped, even stale cheese gets melted in if it's not too blue. Nothing goes to waste, because you can't afford waste. They eat, they grunt their approval. Someone coughs, someone laughs, someone sings a line of a song no one remembers. And all the while, the stew simmers on. You think about your mother sometimes as you stir. She ran this tavern once, long before the walls began to sag and the shutters stuck. Her stew smelled the same, tasted the same too. Maybe it is the same. Maybe this pot is eternal, never washed, just added to. A bubbling cauldron of inherited mistakes and borrowed ingredients. By evening, the pot is half full and wholly questionable. You throw in a few stale oats and splash in some water. It'll stretch. It always does. You're tired. The kind of tired that seeps into your joints and makes your eyes burn. But the stew must keep going. People will keep coming. And you'll keep stirring, because you are a tavern keeper. And your stew, your mystery, your burden, your lifeblood, is the only thing that keeps the town upright, even if no one knows what's in it. It's still dark when you hear the hooves again. They scrape across your floorboards like a too familiar ghost. You groan softly, cheek pressed to the warm, greasy wood of the taproom table where you accidentally fell asleep. Again. Outside, the world is still sleeping, save for the roosters and the mice. But in here, in your drafty, smoky tavern, a goat has just walked in. Again. You don't even look up. You already know which goat it is. Same gray patch down its back. Same wildly rotating eyeballs. Same distinct, slightly sour smell, like cheese left too close to the fire. And behind the goat, of course, you know who's following. Alric, the goat herd. The man who never drinks enough to fall asleep in your stable, but drinks just enough to forget boundaries, manners, and basic animal containment. You sit up slowly, blinking crusted sleep from your eyes as the goat begins nosing at the ash pile near the hearth. The tavern is still thick with the memory of last night's fire, smoke that clings to the beams and seeps into the floorboards. Bits of straw and chicken feathers still float lazily through the stale air. The goat snorts once, finds a crumb of something, maybe bread, maybe not, and begins chewing with gusto. You rise, bones creaking like a battered cider barrel, and grab the broom. "Not today, Bramble," you say softly. shooing at the animal's backside. The goat ignores you. Behind her, Alric ambles in like a walking haystack in human form. His beard is tangled with twigs. His eyes are pink from too little sleep, or too much mead. "Mornin', keeper," he says cheerfully, as though it's perfectly natural to bring a goat into a place where people eat. You give him a look. He shrugs. "She don't like the cold." "She eats my thatch," you mutter. He grins. "She's got good taste." You sigh. You gave up arguing with Alric 3 winters ago. The man's been drinking in your tavern since your father kept the keys, and somehow, over the years, the goat became part of the price of his loyalty. You tried banning Bramble once. He came back with 3 goats. One of them gave birth under a bench. That was a dark week. So now you simply tolerate the goat. She doesn't bite, after all. She's mostly clean. She likes sitting near the hearth. And strange as it seems, many of the regulars don't mind her. Some even greet her first before they order their ale. You sweep around her gently, coaxing a burned scrap of turnip peel into the dustpan. The tavern floor tells the full tale of the night before. Spilled broth, muddy boot prints, a broken pipe, 1 chicken feather, and a suspicious stain that no one is ever going to admit to. The bench near the door is cracked again. Someone, probably the one-eyed Cooper, tried to dance on it after midnight. The lute player passed out on the table with his instrument tucked lovingly beneath one arm. There's still half a sausage on his plate. Bramble eyes it. "No," you say aloud. She looks up, tail twitching. Then, in a gesture that borders on defiance, she drops something on your floor. You sigh again. By the time the sun creeps through the frost-rimed window panes, the tavern smells like warm ash, stale ale, and goat. But the hearth is lit. The pots are boiling, and the bread is rising slowly in the oven's belly. Outside, the village is waking, the church bell clanging dully through the morning mist. And once again, your tavern will fill. With travelers, merchants, gossipers, and mud-covered farmers, with laughter and threats and whispered deals, with songs half-remembered and debts long overdue, and yes, with Alric and Bramble. Because the truth is, your tavern is not just an inn. It's not just a place to drink or eat. It is, in its way, a shelter, a strange and smoky sanctuary for man and beast alike, where the rules are made up as you go, where goats are guests, and where sometimes the best defense is a stool leg and a good glare. You pour a mug of small ale for yourself and take a seat on the bench by the hearth, watching the flames lick at the soot-stained stone. Bramble nestles beside your boots, rumbling softly, chewing on nothing at all. You think, not for the first time, that she's the only thing in this place with more stubbornness than you. A knock rattles the tavern door. Your first customer. You sigh, rise, smooth your apron. "Come in," you call out. The latch lifts. A pair of boots stomp snow from their soles. And in they come. Hungry, cold, hoping for warmth and ale. Behind you, the goat farts quietly. Welcome to another day at your tavern. The light outside is fading to a dusty, bruised purple, and with it comes the promise of noise, stink, and spilled drink. You've swept the floors twice, cleared yesterday's bones from beneath the benches, and stirred the stew till the wooden spoon cracked. It doesn't matter. Within the hour, this place will smell of sweat, smoke, cheap ale, and whatever that mercenary in the corner stepped in. You light the tallow lamps early. The smoke curls up into the low rafters, joining the last strands of sunbeam in a dance of soot and shadows. The benches creak under your weight as you double-check the jugs. The ale's sourer than usual. You top it off with a splash of something stronger. No one will notice. Not the regulars, anyway. Their tongues are numbed. Their standards lower than the dog that sleeps under the hearth. Then they come. First, the monks. Not the quiet, praying kind. These ones hail from the lesser-known orders, the ones more famous for their thirst than their piety. They arrive 2 by 2, robes stained at the hem, cheeks already ruddy, laughing about something that definitely wasn't in the Bible. One tries to bless the ale barrel. You swat him gently away with a smile, but your eyes say, "No, Father, not again." Next are the local girls, cheeks pink from the cold and the wine they drank behind the hedgerow. They drift in like geese, honking and laughing, skirts too high and voices too loud. You nod at them. They'll make you coin tonight. Not directly. Your inn isn't a brothel, though it sometimes forgets that, after midnight. But drunk men tip better when a girl perches nearby and pretends to listen. And then the worst kind. The mercenaries. Swords clanking, eyes gleaming, always walking like they expect a fight. You see the leader first. He's the one who always pays. His boots are cleaner than the others, and he wears a bit of red cloth tied to his bicep. Spoils from a skirmish, probably, or maybe from someone's sister. He doesn't smile when he enters. None of them do. But they sit, and they drink. And for a moment, the room settles into a rhythm. Until it doesn't. A monk stands too quickly, sloshing ale down his front and stumbling into a mercenary. The mercenary's elbow flies up instinctively, knocking the monk's cup out of his hand and onto the girl beside him. She screeches. The monk protests. The mercenary growls. You're already moving. With one hand, you grab a jug of slightly better ale. With the other, you raise your voice above the din. First round's on the house, lads. But only if no one bleeds before the stew's gone. Laughter. Tension broken, for now. But you've got the bruises on your arms and the crack in your front tooth to remind you that not all tavern fights are stopped with a smile and a bribe. Behind the counter, your wife or your sister, or maybe just the woman who hasn't left yet, cleans cups with a rag that's more sentiment than fabric. She rolls her eyes at the flirting, the shouting, the noise, but she keeps working. She's heard every joke, dodged every pinch. Her slap is quick, her aim quicker. The fire in the hearth blazes bright now, and someone's produced a lute, badly tuned, worse played. Still, a few of the girls clap along, and one of the monks tries to sing, though the words are more moan than melody. A pair of gamblers have set up in the corner, muttering over dice that may or may not be weighted. The hours stretch on. A dog limps in, sniffs a spilled stew bone, and curls up by the door. A man vomits into his own lap and falls asleep at the table. You clean around him. Another slips out the back with a girl on his arm and his purse noticeably lighter. You refill the jugs. You swap out the ash-filled candles. You replace a bench leg with a loose cobblestone because no one has time to fetch the carpenter. And all the while, you listen. Taverns are the heartbeat of the town. You learn who's angry with whom, who's planning to skip town, who's hiding a child not their own. You hear whispers of taxes, of tithes, of plots. Some real, most ale-fueled nonsense. But you remember it all. Because one day, someone will ask what you know, and pretending not to know anything can get you hanged. Near midnight, the loudest one stands to toast. He slurs something about war, or women, or God. It's hard to tell, but the others raise their cups anyway. Some spill ale onto the table. Others knock over candles. You lunge to right one before it rolls into the straw floor. You're quick. Faster than the last time. Eventually, one by one, they drop, heads on tables, backs to walls, snoring into stew. You and the girl begin the quiet work, mopping, scrubbing, collecting cups sticky with spit. You find a gold coin someone dropped. You pocket it. A small victory. Out the window, the moon hangs crooked in the black sky. The town sleeps. But you, tavern keeper, watcher of fools, and broker of hangovers, you stay awake. Because tomorrow, the same thing happens again, and someone will bleed. But let's take a few steps back. You never really planned to end up here. No child dreams of sticky floors and ale-stained benches, of patching shutters at midnight and unclogging chamber pots with a bent ladle. But life, as it so often does, made other arrangements, and it made them fast. Maybe your father died. He clutched his chest one autumn night after shouting at a brewer who shorted the barley. He hit the floor harder than you'd have expected for someone so thin. You were still wiping mugs in the corner when it happened. Or maybe it was less sudden. He drank himself into a slow, forgetful stupor over the course of years. Ale, then mead, then whatever fermenting slop he could barter for a chicken or two. He stopped remembering your name before he stopped showing up for market. Or perhaps it was the law that finally caught up with him. Debt, smuggling, unpaid tithes, or that old story about the Reeves missing goat. One morning, he simply wasn't there anymore. The tavern door hung open. A few footprints in the frost led off toward the woods. No note. Either way, when the embers of the hearth cooled and the debt collectors knocked, they weren't asking for him. They were looking at you. You were never meant to run this place. You were the one sweeping barley husks off the floor at dawn, the one fetching buckets from the well while your father told dirty jokes to passing peddlers. But now, the books are yours, and they don't balance. The ink is faded, the margins full of IOUs, and more than one page is stained with something you're not brave enough to sniff. And so, you tie on your apron. You do what he did, or what you think he did, because no one ever really taught you. You stir the stew the way he did, by feel and not measure. You skim the scum from the ale barrel, and hope that means it's ready. You pound the warped tables back into place with a stone, and whisper prayers to St. Arnulf, patron of brewers, under your breath. On good days, a handful of regulars wander in, the shepherd who smells of lanolin and curses under his breath, the widow with 3 teeth and a tongue, sharper than any dagger, a peddler who always claims he's got relics from Constantinople, but never anything worth more than a turnip. They sit, drink, mutter, and pay, sometimes. On bad days, the taxman comes, or worse, the priest. He frowns at the women who laugh too loudly, eyes the musicians like they're already halfway to hell, and tells you, in no uncertain terms, that ale is the gateway to all manner of sin. You offer him a free mug anyway. He never says no. You sleep above the tavern now, or try to. The straw mattress is full of flea nests, and the beams creak like dying men every time the wind blows. But it's home. Your boots are beside the door. Your knife is under the pillow. The walls smell like old wood smoke and onion skins. You've stopped noticing. Sometimes you catch yourself laughing like you used to. Loud, sudden, half-drunken barks that startle the chickens. Or you tilt your head the same way when a traveler tells a tall tale. You see his reflection in the copper pots when the light hits just so. You hear his voice in your own when you shout at a boy trying to sneak off without paying. The tavern is aging, and so are you. The floorboards sag like tired shoulders. The fireplace smokes unless you coax it just right. The shutters rattle and the door sticks when it rains, but it holds, just barely. You've learned how to keep the worst of the bar fights from turning fatal. You know which stools splinter under weight and which ones hold. You've figured out that a bit of crushed mint hides the smell of sour beer, and that a smile, even a tired one, gets you further than threats most of the time. You've also learned that debts never vanish. They just change hands. Now, they belong to you. The brewer wants coin for the next cask. The cooper wants payment for the leaky barrel he swears was perfect when it left his shop. The landlord, God help you, wants rent. You think he might be joking, but he never laughs. The worst part? You don't even hate it. Not always. There are nights when the hearth glows just right, and the ale is fresh, and someone sings an old ballad that makes even the roughest hands go still. On those nights, when the mugs clink and the rain drums gently on the shutters, it feels like something close to magic. As if the whole world has gathered here to forget, just for a while, how cold and cruel everything else is. You never planned for this. You didn't ask for it. But it's yours now. Debt, vomit, and all. So you wipe the mugs. You stir the stew. You pour another round for the blacksmith and the gravedigger, and the girl with the cracked lute. You nod at the peddler and ignore the wink from the washerwoman. You light the candles, pull the latch tight, and thank whatever saint is listening that, for one more night, the roof still holds. This is your place now. And like it or not, you're the tavern keeper. The coin never clinks in your palm. That's the first thing you learn, isn't it? When you took over the tavern, whether by inheritance, desperation, or simply being the last one foolish enough to still care, you expected money. Not a lot. Just enough to patch the roof, replace the splintered bench, maybe buy a new kettle without 3 leaks. But no, instead, you get eggs. Fresh if you're lucky, slightly warm, and with feathers still stuck to the shell. One man leaves a goat behind the stable and promises he'll return with coin. That was 4 months ago. The goat, to its credit, is doing better than most customers. Every evening, the tavern fills with smoke, laughter, and voices wet with ale, but never with jingling purses. Oh, they slap their belts like they're heavy with silver. They swear they'll pay tomorrow, or after harvest, or after they win that dice game in the corner. And like a fool, you nod, you pour, you add another line to the tally board behind the bar. There it stands, scratched chalk against rough wood, the sacred monument to your broken dreams. Lines, hash marks, initials, a whole forest of debt, each branch pointing to another drunk with a charming smile and no intention of paying. Some names you don't even remember anymore. Others make your jaw tighten every time they cross the threshold again, grinning like they don't owe you 7 hens and a sack of barley. You tried real credit once. Parchment, ink, and wax. Neat little ledgers just like the guild man told you. That lasted all of a week. Someone spilled stew across the book. The ink ran. And now half your records read like poetry, written by a blind pig. The chalk works better. At least until it rains, and the roof leaks again. A young plowman named Edric came in last night. Mud up to his knees, hair like straw soaked in cider, and a grin that could melt a widow's purse. He said he had no coin. Of course he didn't, but swore his mother would bring you a wheel of cheese in the morning. You served him a bowl of pottage and 2 mugs of your weak ale. He left with his boots untied and a song in his throat. This morning, no mother, no cheese, just rain and the lingering stink of wet wool and broken promises. Still, you keep serving, because every once in a while, a coin does appear, tarnished, nicked, bent from being hidden too long beneath floorboards or in the seam of a cloak. And on those days, you hold it in your palm like a gift from heaven, a real silver penny, enough to buy salt or a few hours of quiet in your own head. You've learned to recognize the real payers from the storytellers. Real payers come in quietly, keep their hoods low, drink in silence, and nod when the tally's added. The others, they shout about past glories. They slap the table. They insist their cousin is a reeve. And they always, always vanish the moment you turn your back. And yet, without them, there's no tavern. No firelight bouncing off the tankards. No bard singing too loud. No smell of onions and sweat and bad decisions. They are your customers, your burden, your livelihood. And, in some strange way, your family. A dysfunctional, unwashed, occasionally violent family. But yours, all the same. You tried once to refuse service to a man who owed you 12 nights' worth of ale and half a duck. He wept. Right there, in the doorway, rain soaking his cloak. Said he'd just buried his wife. Said the tavern was the only place he could still hear laughter. So you poured him a mug. Added another line to the tally board. Sometimes a priest will lecture you about sin. Ale leads to sloth, they say. Credit invites corruption. You nod along, pour them a cup of your strongest, and they forget their sermon by the second sip. Then they tell you what the bishop confessed over dinner last week. You hear everything behind this bar. Who's cheating who? Who's stealing grain? Who's hiding a pig from the tax man? But none of it buys you candles or pays the boy who hauls the buckets out back. So you smile, wipe the cups clean, and keep listening. A woman came in last week, older, with hands like tree bark and eyes sharp enough to carve wood. She paid in bread, actual coin-shaped loaves with caraway seeds and still warm from the oven. You gave her the best seat near the fire and told her she could stay as long as she liked. That night, she sang a lullaby you hadn't heard since your mother still had teeth. And that, too, was worth something. Bartering's an art. A little cabbage here, a patch of wool there. Someone promises to help fix your shutters, though they never show up. One man gave you his boots as collateral. Another tried to trade his own brother. You're still not sure if he meant it, and through it all, you endure. Because tavern keepers, like old beams and stubborn mules, don't break easily. You learn to stretch flour with moss. You learn how to thin ale with river water and a smile. You learn that people need a place to forget, and that more often than not, they'll pay with the only thing they've got left. Stories, laughter, gossip, and time. Even when they can't pay with coin, they give you something. A song, a secret, a moment, a night not spent alone in silence. And in this world, sometimes that's enough. The knock comes just after second bell. You recognize it by sound alone. 3 sharp raps, spaced like the clack of a greedy tongue behind yellowing teeth. You don't need to check the door to know it's the Reeve. No one else knocks like that. No one else wears arrogance like a wool cloak, wet from the rain and smelling faintly of spoiled meat. You glance around your tavern in a panic, though you've done this dance a dozen times before. The spilled ale near the hearth? Leave it. The chicken bones on the table in the corner? Kick them under the bench. The boy, with his feet on the table? Hiss at him. He jumps like a rat doused with boiling broth. You open the door slowly. There he stands, Reeve Godwin of Northweather Parish. His doublet is too fine for a man who doesn't work. He's wearing a red feather in his cap again, which means he thinks he's owed extra for being seen. His boots are mud-caked and polished in all the wrong places. He looks past you before even greeting you, sniffing the air like a man searching for rot. "Evening," he says, as if you were expecting him. You weren't. You never are. "Evening, Reeve," you say, because calling him anything less will cost you more. He steps inside uninvited, the way they always do. He looks around the common room, squinting at the rafters, the smoke-darkened beams, the sour-eyed patrons huddled at tables nursing their half-pints and their resentments. A minstrel coughs into his sleeve and pretends to tune a lute that has only 4 strings. The Reeve grimaces. "Still open, are we?" he says with a slow turn of his boot heel on the floorboards. "License says till 9th bell." You know full well your license says nothing of the sort. It says whatever he wants it to say this week. The parchment tacked up behind the counter is more symbolic than binding. It cost you 3 hens and your best wheel of cheese just to get it signed, and you've paid in beer and favors ever since. "I was just about to call last orders." You lie. "We keep it quiet, Reeve. Just locals tonight." He raises an eyebrow. "Quiet's a matter of opinion, isn't it?" You smile, painfully. He holds out his hand. You don't wait for the words. You reach below the counter and produce the same thing you gave him last week. A small leather pouch with 5 coins and a promise you'll fix the broken bench near the door before next moon. He weighs it in his palm like a baker judging a loaf. Not enough, probably. It never is. His eyes flick to the bar. "You've still got that rye ale, haven't you?" "Cask was just tapped this morning," you say, already reaching for a cup. He doesn't drink like a man enjoying the taste. He drinks like it's his due. 1 long pull, a grunt, then a second. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and leans against the bar as if he owns the beams beneath it, which in a way, he does. Or at least, he owns your right to keep serving behind them. "You've got travelers coming through again," he says casually, swirling the last inch of ale in his cup. You nod. 3 merchants. From Guilford, you answer, careful not to offer too much. Passing through on their way to market. Do they pay well? Not enough to mention. He smiles, but it's not kind. He's sniffing for contraband or gossip or anything he can use to squeeze a few more pennies from your already worn purse. You remember the last tavern keeper who refused him? Poor Hugh of Wattlecross. Claimed he was a free man with rights to trade and pour drink as he pleased. The reeve shut him down within a week. Claimed his thatch roof was a fire hazard. Claimed he was selling weak ale. Claimed his serving girl gave him the pox. They found Hugh's tavern boarded up and his best cask split open on the road. He was gone by the next harvest. You pour the reeve another drink. You're good at remembering your obligations, he says, draining it. You'll do well here, so long as you stay generous. You nod, and you hate how small it feels. The law isn't made for men like you. It's made for men like him, men who write it, bend it, and pretend it's justice when it suits them. Your license is little more than parchment and threat. One misplaced word, one overfilled cup, and he'll revoke it. Say you were serving on holy days. Say your ale is watered. Say your patrons are thieves. And maybe some of that's even true. But who else do they expect to feed the village in the dead of winter, or warm a stranger on a stormy night? You run a tavern, not a church. But in your own way, you offer sanctuary. And that matters. The reeve sets down his empty cup and adjusts his feathered cap. I'll be back next week, he says. Same time, and do try to keep the singing down. You watch him walk out, smug as a cat with a stolen quail egg. And just like that, your tavern survives another night. You exhale, slowly, and pick up his cup. Still warm and sour. You pour it out, wipe the counter, and prepare for the next round of quiet bribes and louder silences. You run a tavern? Yes, but more importantly, you endure. Because in this world, law is just another kind of thirst. And you've learned how to keep the mugs filled. They say music soothes the soul, but you've yet to see a lute stop a brawl. It's nearing dusk, and the tavern's smoky interior is already brimming with sweat, noise, and the heavy stench of onion-soused breath. Your hands are raw from hauling casks, your throat dry from shouting over the din, and your back aches from lifting a patron who drank himself under a bench before noon. But the real trouble isn't the drink. It's the noise that follows it. You glance toward the hearth where the piper is warming his fingers over the embers. He's a stringy man, with no teeth and fewer morals, and you've seen him sleep behind pig carts for coin less than a rat's tail. But he plays loud. And in a place like this, loud counts for a lot. You didn't plan to host performers when you inherited the tavern, or, more truthfully, when the tavern inherited you after your father keeled over face first in a vat of half-fermented ale. But silence drives drinkers to conversation. Conversation turns to complaints. And complaints, in here, fester faster than boiled turnips in a summer sun. So, you hired a bard once, paid him with a crust of bread and a bed of straw in the corner. He recited something about St. George and a dragon, but his voice cracked like old roof thatch, and half the room mistook it for a sermon. They threw cabbage. The bard wept. You wept harder, because cabbage costs money. After that, you learned. If you're going to let someone stand in your tavern with a harp, you'd best make sure they're either blind, drunk, or both, and willing to work for food scraps and the vague promise of exposure. Tonight, you've got the piper, a traveling juggler who smells of spoiled figs, and a boy with a 2-string lyre that he insists belonged to his grandfather, who once played before a bishop. Judging by the boy's cracked voice and the smell of goat urine clinging to his cloak, the bishop must have been very, very far away. The piper strikes up a tune. It's the same one he always plays, something in a minor key that may or may not be called the muck cart reel. It makes the drinkers sway, at least. Old Bryce slams his mug on the table, in time with the beat, and the barmaid, who's already pinched 3 arses and slapped twice that number, starts humming along through her teeth. For a moment, you allow yourself to breathe, the kind of slow, shallow breath that doesn't disturb the delicate balance of stale air and tension in the room. You lean against the bar. A man snores in the corner with a chicken tucked under one arm like a tankard. A good night. Then the juggler drops a cup. It's not even his cup. It's a patron's, wooden, cracked, but still half full of mead. The juggler had tried to impress the locals by snatching it mid-pour, spinning it above his head, and catching it behind his back. He fails, spectacularly. The mead splashes onto the lap of a visiting tanner, a man who already smells like boiled animal hide and rage. The tanner stands. The juggler bows. And you, idiot that you are, step between them with your hands up and a smile that hasn't worked since Lent. "You'll pay for that," the tanner growls, his breath sour with last week's onions. "I paid in laughter," the juggler beams. You sigh. This is why you don't like entertainers. A fist is thrown. Not at you, thank the Virgin, but at the boy with the lyre, who had nothing to do with any of it but was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time and maybe strummed a little too loudly when the punch landed. The room explodes in cheers. Someone throws a stool. The piper changes tempo, because of course he does, and now it sounds like a jig, a very violent jig. You shout for order. No one listens. You wade into the mess, dodge an elbow, and yank the juggler by the collar out the door. He smells even worse outside, under the stars. "No more cups," you hiss. "Stick to apples or rocks or something less breakable." "But I'm an artist." "You're a nuisance." He shrugs, grins, and slips back inside like a dog who's never been trained, but knows how to look sorry. You follow him, rubbing your temples. Back at the hearth, the piper's cheeks are puffed like boiled dumplings. The tune he's playing now might be "The Dog's Wedding," or "The Milkmaid's Lament," or just whatever falls out of his lungs when he's 4 ales in and feeling bold. The boy, with the lyre, has taken refuge atop a table, strumming in defiance. The room has returned to a state of mild chaos, the kind you can live with. You refill a few mugs, mop a bit of mead off the floor with the edge of your cloak, glance toward the window to make sure the church bells haven't started ringing. It's always bad when the priest gets wind of ungodly noises, but all is well. Well enough. This is the game. Hire a juggler, expect a fight. Pay a piper, expect your ears to bleed. Feed a bard and he'll sing until you regret giving him soup. But the alternative? A silent tavern. Empty benches, no music, no stories, no laughter. just the drip of ale from the cask and the whisper of cold wind through the thatch. You know which version fills your cup. So you let the lute drown out the fists. Most of the time. And if someone breaks a chair, well, you always needed firewood anyway. You stand behind the worn wooden bar, your hands steady, though your ears strain to catch every whispered word carried on the thick haze of ale fumes and smoke. The tavern's hearth crackles low, casting shadows that dance with the flicker of candlelight, painting faces in half glow and half secrecy. This is your kingdom, a rough, muddy floor, the clink of mugs, the low murmur of voices rising and falling like the tide. Here, in this cramped, smoky room, secrets come cheap, and tongues loosen even cheaper. It starts simply enough. A grunt here, a chuckle there, the clatter of tankards that dulls the sharp edges of what's said next. But then, beneath the laughter and the bawdy songs, you hear it. Words not meant for your ears, but impossible to ignore. Gossip about the blacksmith's missing wife and the miller's son spotted slipping through shadowed lanes. Whispers of discontent against the local lord. Too heavy-handed with his taxes, they say. Too eager to break kneecaps for a missed payment. And something darker still. A talk of heresy. Of men preaching in hidden groves, away from the eyes of the church. You wipe down a mug, pretending to polish it, but listening all the while. Your eyes flick toward the far corner, where a hooded stranger leans in close to a farmer's wife, their words so low that only you, trained by years behind this bar, catch their dangerous murmur. The stranger's eyes dart around the room, wary of prying ears. But they have chosen your tavern for a reason. You know better than to interrupt. What's heard in the tavern stays in the tavern. Yet, you also know the price of speaking out loud or keeping silent too long. Across the room, a group of mercenaries debate loudly over the recent skirmishes beyond the town walls. Their voices are thick with the harshness of battle, and between swigs of sour ale, they name names. Officers who betrayed their own men, knights who fled at the first arrow. The kind of talk that, if overheard by the wrong person, could end in a blade finding a throat before morning. But here, with the warmth of fire and the haze of drink, truth spills freely. Sometimes to the peril of those who speak it. Sometimes to the amusement of those who listen. You catch the eyes of an old woman sitting alone by the door, her fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped cup. She leans in to the man beside her, her voice cracked but sharp. Did you hear about the priest in the village? They say he's hiding forbidden books, ones that speak against the church. You know, that kind of talk could be deadly. Heresy is not taken lightly, and the church's shadow falls long and cold over this land. But the old woman's words drip with the courage of desperation. Or madness. Your mind flickers to the Lord's men who pass by the tavern each day, eyes scanning for trouble, ears always listening. You can almost feel their gaze pressing through the tavern walls. Every secret spilled here is a thread in a web that could catch you, or worse, the ones who trust you to keep their darkest whispers. A shout erupts suddenly, a tavern brawl fueled by too much ale and too many grudges. The room swells with chaos, fists fly, curses echo, chairs overturn. Amid the din, a phrase cuts through, clear and sharp. "The tax collector's coming. He's doubling the levy." The news hits like a punch, The room quiets for a heartbeat as the weight of that truth settles over everyone. You know your role well. You're not just a keeper of mugs and mead. You are the silent vault, the one who hears all and tells none. Your life depends on discretion as much as your ale depends on barley and yeast. The gossip is a poison, but also a kind of currency, traded for another pint, a nod of respect, or a shared glance of understanding. In this smoky room, secrets become more than words. They are survival. You lean in, listening to the murmurs of rebellion, the tales of stolen kisses, the fears whispered about the Lord's justice, and the hope carried in stories of escape. Each one is a thread in the tapestry of this town's heartbeat, a pulse you feel in the rough wood beneath your fingers and the warm breath of those who gather here. And as the night deepens and the ale flows thicker, you remind yourself, what you hear here stays here. The tavern's walls hold its stories, but your silence keeps you alive. You hear it before you see it. The heavy knock on the oaken door. It's not the clatter of a drunken patron or the usual rattle of a delivery cart. This knock carries weight, the kind that pulls the breath from your lungs and stiffens your spine. The church has arrived. Again. The tavern quiets as you wipe your hands on your worn apron, feeling the prickling heat of uneasy eyes on your back. You swallow a lump that's formed in your throat and force your face into something resembling calm. The heavy footsteps in the entryway echo like a funeral bell. And then, the door swings open. Father Godwin stands there, robe crisp, hands folded, eyes sharper than a blade hidden beneath a monk's hood. He steps inside, and the flickering candlelight catches the gold cross that hangs low on his chest. The room smells of ale, smoke, and spilled secrets. But Father Godwin's presence turns the familiar scent sour and heavy, like rotten fruit left in the corner. You greet him with a nod that's more habit than warmth. You know why he's here. The ale, the music, the laughter, each a sin in the eyes of the church. But what troubles him most is the back room, the whispered stories, the quick footsteps, the soft laughter that isn't meant for his ears. Women, so many women, hidden behind closed doors, their presence a challenge to his holy order. Yet, despite the sermon he's about to deliver, Father Godwin steps closer, and you see a flicker of something unexpected. Hunger. Not for your soul, but for your stew. Your kitchen always smells of heaven, he says quietly, nodding toward the bubbling cauldron where meat and herbs mingle. I find your stew hard to resist, even on a day when I'm meant to turn my back on such worldly delights. You offer a thin smile, but inside, your nerves are tangled like rats in a grain sack. The church is powerful, but so is the need for a hot meal after endless hours of prayers and penance. It's this small contradiction between the fiery sermons and the soft warmth of your hearth that keeps your tavern alive. Father Godwin settles at the heavy wooden table, wiping his hands on his robe, eyes never leaving yours. The room feels smaller now, as if the walls themselves are leaning in, listening. Ale is the devil's drink, he begins, voice low but firm. Music leads souls astray. And what of those women in the back? I warn you, this place skirts the edge of damnation. You nod, eyes fixed on the bowl of steaming stew sliding before him. They seek warmth, Father, a place to rest, to eat. Not all sins are born from choice. He chews slowly, thoughtfully. The simple food is good, hearty enough to fill even a fasting man's belly. The sounds of the tavern, the low murmur of conversation, the clink of wooden mugs, seem to soften around him. "You run a dangerous game," Father Godwin says finally, pushing the bowl away. The church watches closely, and not all who visit your tavern do so with pure intent. You know he's right. You've seen men drinking away debts in desperation, plotting rebellion over spilled ale, and whispered heresies exchanged with a glance. You've smelled the coming plague in the breath of a fevered traveler. Yet, you keep the doors open, the fires lit, and the ale flowing, because someone has to. The priest rises, crossing himself before heading toward the door. "I will pray for your soul and for the salvation of this place." Outside, the chill night air seems to swallow his footsteps. Once the heavy door creaks closed, the room exhales, the weight lifting like a dark cloud drifting away. You wipe your forehead and turn to the hearth. The embers glow softly, and the familiar comforting smell of smoke and stew wraps around you like a worn cloak. The church may condemn your tavern as a den of sin, but here, beneath the flickering light, it is something else, a refuge for the lost, the weary, and the hopeful. You wipe down another tankard, the worn wood slick with spilled ale and finger grime. The tavern's hum is thick tonight, a mix of laughter, shouted bargains, and the low rumble of voices weaving secrets you aren't supposed to hear. You know better than to get involved. Your job is to keep the cups full, the fires burning, and your head down. The shadows in the corners hold stories best left untouched. A pair at the far table catches your eye. She's a slender woman, eyes glinting with mischief beneath a messy braid. He's a soldier, broad-shouldered, scarred, smelling of sweat and old blood. They argue quietly at first, the tension simmering beneath their words like a kettle ready to boil over. You've seen fights start over less. Stolen glances, a careless jest, or a hand brushing too long. The tavern is a stage, and these two are playing a dangerous scene. The man slams his tankard down, making the ale splash like a warning. She leans in, her voice sharp as broken glass, but there's a fire in her gaze that matches the hearth. You glance away before the blow lands. You've cleaned enough blood off these tables to know better than to watch. Near the hearth, a friar tiptoes past, robes whispering against the stone floor. He's young, with a nervous energy that clashes with his solemn vow of chastity. You spot him stealing a glance at the serving girl behind the bar. She's busy refilling mugs, but her cheeks burn as he lingers too long in her sightline. A fleeting smile, barely a touch, a stolen kiss in the shadowed corner where no one cares to look. You shake your head, half amused, half wary. Even in a world so bound by rules and faith, human desire carves its own paths. Sometimes those paths lead to laughter, sometimes to heartbreak, and sometimes to knives. A sudden crash snaps you back. The mercenaries have arrived. They spill through the door like a storm, rough, loud, and smelling of earth and sweat. These men live by their fists and their pay, and tonight, their pockets are heavier than usual. You brace yourself for the chaos that follows. Cups shatter, tables scrape harshly against stone floors, and the air thickens with the scent of spilled ale and old rage. One of the mercenaries, red-haired and wild-eyed, spots a rival at the bar. Words fly sharp and quick, insults honed by months of grudges and unspoken debts. You move fast, stepping between them just as fists rise. The bar, your domain, is a fragile piece you guard fiercely. You break my mug. You break my neck. You growl, voice low and steady. For a moment, the anger in their eyes flickers with respect, or perhaps surprise that a tavern keeper dares stand up to hired muscle. The fight simmers down, but the tension stays like a bad taste. You retreat behind the bar, breathing deep, wiping sweat from your brow. The customers settle, murmurs rising to fill the silence. Lovers return to whispered conversations. Mercenaries nurse bruises with hard drinks. You catch sight of the serving girl again, her hands trembling slightly as she sets down a fresh mug. The friar slips out the back door, shadows swallowing his retreat. The woman from before has stood, voice still sharp but now edged with exhaustion. The soldier's glare softens, regret flickering in his eyes. This is the rhythm of your nights, a dance of love and lust, violence and forgiveness, played out under the flickering glow of tallow candles. You've learned not to get caught in the steps, only to guide the music with a steady hand and quiet eyes. Behind every laugh, every quarrel, every stolen kiss, there is a story you'll never tell, and a secret you'll never share. Because here, in this smoky, crowded tavern, the shadows hold everything. And you keep the peace, one tankard at a time. You wake before the first hints of dawn, the chill of early morning creeping through the thin wooden walls of your tavern. The sky outside is a dull gray, promising rain by midday, just like yesterday and the day before. Your breath rises in little clouds as you step over the sleeping forms scattered across the straw-strewn floor. Villagers, merchants, soldiers, all passed out after the night's revelry. The scent of stale ale, sweat, and smoke clings to everything like a second skin. It's a smell you know by heart. You shuffle to the back, where the barrels stand in solemn rows, their wooden skins swollen from dampness, some leaking slow trickles of precious ale onto the dirt floor. You curse under your breath. A slow leak here, a crack there. The barrels are old, held together with iron hoops that groan under the weight of centuries of use. But they are all you have, and you know your patrons expect nothing less than ale flowing from dusk till dawn, regardless of how foul the weather or poor the ingredients. Water is your greatest enemy. The well is a muddy pit fed by rain and runoff from nearby fields. There's no purity in it, only a murky taste that threatens to spoil your brews. You've heard stories of tavern keepers falling ill, or worse, when their water turned poison overnight. So you've learned to collect rainwater from your roof, catching the early droplets in large wooden barrels. Still, rain here is a gamble, sometimes too much, washing away the topsoil, sometimes too little, leaving you parched and desperate. Your hops are fewer than you'd like. Hops, those tiny green cones that give ale its bitter bite and help preserve it, grow only in limited pockets of the land. They're expensive, and trade routes are often disrupted by war or bandits. When you manage to scrape together a handful, you ration them carefully, mixing them sparingly into the mash. Sometimes you rely on bitter herbs or wild flowers gathered from the nearby woods, hoping to mimic that familiar tang. The brewing process is a ritual you perform with quiet reverence. Firewood crackles beneath a large copper cauldron, its blackened sides stained with countless batches past. You stir the thick, sweet mash, feeling the heat through the wooden spoon. Your hands are rough and calloused, stained from years of toil. The air is thick with steam, carrying the sharp aroma of malt and hops, or whatever substitute you've managed this week. You're no alchemist, but you've become something close. You test the brew by taste, wincing at its sour edge or weak flavor. You adjust the fire, timing, and mix as best you can. Sometimes, the ale tastes like old leather soaked in rain. Or worse, like a damp boot left by the fire overnight. But your patrons drink it without complaint, too grateful for any warmth to bother with finer tastes. Your barrels, though, are your constant worry. The wood swells and shrinks with the changing weather, and the iron hoops rust and snap without warning. You've patched cracks with pitch and tar, replaced hoops with bent metal scavenged from the smithy. Each barrel is a fragile vessel, holding not just ale, but your livelihood. When the first customers stumble in, bleary-eyed and grasping, you pour their mugs with a practiced hand. The ale foams thinly, its color muddy but inviting. You watch as the warmth spreads through their bodies, loosening tongues and easing worries. For a few hours, your tavern is a haven, a noisy, smoky respite from the harsh world outside. Outside, the rain begins in earnest, drumming on the thatched roof, soaking the mud floors and turning the street to a river of brown water. But inside, the fire burns low, the mugs clink, and the low hum of voices swells into laughter and song. Your ale may be flawed, your barrels leaky, but in this moment, your tavern is alive. You think of the prayers you mumble when you add yeast to the mash, prayers for good fermentation, for ale that will not sour too quickly, for customers who will return. You don't know if the gods listen, but it feels better to hope. As the night deepens, you wipe sweat from your brow, lean against the bar, and let the sounds wash over you. The ale may taste like a damp boot, the water may be foul, the barrels may leak, but this is your world, and somehow you keep it flowing. You're wiping down the bar when he walks in. The stranger, clad in a heavy cloak that smells faintly of distant seas and leather, his boots mute against the uneven wooden floorboards. He doesn't look like the usual crowd. You notice it immediately, not just the way he carries himself, but the way his eyes scan the room, sharp and calculating, like a hawk searching for prey. The tavern is dim, lit by flickering candles and a tired hearth. But he doesn't seem bothered by the shadows. He doesn't greet you with words. He doesn't ask for your cheapest ale or your most generous meal. Instead, he slides a small pouch across the worn counter, the clink of silver spilling out like a secret. Too much coin for someone who looks like he's running from something. You eye the pouch carefully. Silver coins are rare and valuable, often reserved for the traveling nobility or merchants carrying fortunes. This stranger isn't dressed like a lord, though. His cloak is well worn, his hands rough and calloused from work or travel. But those coins, they speak of a story you don't know yet. Without a word, he pulls a battered map from within his cloak and spreads it on the table. The edges are torn, the ink faded, but the lines and symbols tell of faraway places you can only dream of. He taps a spot near the edge of the known world, somewhere beyond your reach, beyond your village. He asks you questions, not with words, but with those sharp eyes and deliberate gestures. You answer the best you can, describing the roads, the dangers, the lords who rule nearby. Every answer you give seems to please him, but the tension in the air is thick. The other patrons watch the stranger nervously, whispering in hushed tones. Stories have traveled through these walls before, of spies, fugitives, and secret messengers. Was he one of them? A man fleeing the king's justice, or bearing secrets that could topple realms? You pour him a mug of your strongest ale, the amber liquid foaming as you set it before him. He raises the cup with a slight nod, but drinks only a sip, eyes never leaving the map. You wonder if he trusts you, or if you're just another stop on a long, dangerous journey. That night, the tavern feels different. The usual clamor dulls to a cautious silence, the shadows seeming to lean in closer. You catch yourself glancing at the stranger every few minutes, trying to read the unreadable expression on his face. Who is he? Where is he going? And what will happen when he leaves? By dawn, the stranger is gone. The map, the coins, the questions, all vanished like smoke on the morning breeze. You're left with the echo of his visit and the uneasy feeling that you've brushed against something much bigger than your quiet life behind the bar. As you sweep the floor and prepare for another day, you realize that serving the traveling stranger wasn't just about ale or coin. It was about being a quiet witness to history's shadows. And sometimes, that's the heaviest burden a tavern keeper can carry. The tavern is thick with smoke and sweat, a swirling haze that clings to your skin and clothes. The fire in the hearth crackles, casting flickering shadows that dance across rough wooden beams and scarred tables. The room hums with the low roar of voices, laughter, grunts, the occasional bark of a curse. It's late, but the tavern's just waking up, as raucous as ever. You know the signs. The drinks are hitting harder now. The air is growing heavier with menace. That grizzled mercenary in the corner, he's been staring too long at the farmer's daughter. The smith's ale is running dry, and the noise level is climbing. You can smell the sour sweat and stale ale mixed with wood smoke, and the faint metallic tang of spilled blood somewhere, not yet visible, but close. You're not a soldier or a town guard. You carry no sword or mace. No badge hangs from your neck. No knight's crest is embroidered on your doublet. You are the keeper of this place, and tonight, that means you're the thin line between a night of fun and a night of broken bones. A low scuffle breaks out near the hearth. You don't need to turn to know what's coming. Two men, both too drunk and too proud, one already red-faced and shouting insults, the other clenching fists, jaw tight as if daring the other to land the first blow. The rest of the tavern hushes just a little, the tension weaving into the smoke like a snake in the shadows. You reach down and pick up the closest weapon you can find, a broken chair leg, splintered at one end but still solid enough to wield. It's crude, but it's yours. It's the tool of peace in this chaos. The two men are eyeing each other, fury and fear mixing like bad wine. You step forward, voice calm but firm, carrying the authority only someone who cleans these floors, serves the ale, and knows every patron's limits can wield. Enough. Your words cut through the din. Heads turn. The men glare, but hesitate. One of them, the mercenary, sneers. "Who's gonna stop me? You?" You grip the chair leg tighter, knuckles white beneath your calloused skin. "Not me. This." You swing the splintered wood low and hard, aiming for shins, calves, places that hurt and cripple but don't kill. Your aim is true. The mercenary stumbles back, cursing, clutching his leg. The farmer's daughter gasps, eyes wide. A hush falls over the room, broken only by the ragged breathing of the man you just struck. "You want to finish this in my tavern?" you say, voice cold. "Or you want to live through the night?" The mercenary snarls, spits on the floor, then stalks back to his seat, nursing his bruised leg. The farmer's daughter sits, trembling but unharmed. The room exhales. The danger is over, for now. You drop the chair leg back behind the bar, where it belongs. You don't like violence, but you've learned it's part of the job. Better a bruised shin than a broken skull. Later, when the tavern quiets and the fire burns low, you find a moment to sit. Your back aches. Your hands tremble from adrenaline and exhaustion. You listen to the soft breathing of your few remaining patrons. You think about all the fights you've broken up, the fights you've let go, the ones you wish you could have stopped, but never did. The tavern isn't just a place to drink. It's a battleground, a refuge, a family. And you're its heart, its shield, its reluctant warrior. Tonight, you kept the peace with a broken chair leg. Tomorrow, you'll do it again. You wake before dawn, the chill biting through your thin woolen cloak. The tavern empty and cold. The hearth's ashes lie gray and untouched, and the air hangs heavy with the damp smell of wood smoke from yesterday's fires. Outside, the village stirs in uneasy silence. You know what's coming today, even before the clatter of hooves or the rattle of the reeves' cart wheels. Today is collection day. Every season without fail, lords, priests, and bailiffs come knocking. They want their share. The lord demands his taxes, the coin that lines his pockets and fuels his wars. The priest insists on tithes, the holy tenth of your hard-earned goods, blessed with a heavy dose of guilt. And the bailiff? Well, he's the one who keeps watch on the edge of your dreams, making sure nothing escapes their greedy hands. If the coffers are empty, he's not above taking what he can. Your ladle, your cups, or worse, your family's peace. You shuffle across the cold floorboards to the back room, where your wife is already awake, eyes tired and wary. She hands you a small, frayed pouch of coins, barely enough to cover a week's ale, much less what will be demanded today. The door creaks open and shadows fall across the room. The bailiff steps inside, leather boots heavy on the stone floor, a ledger tucked under one arm, eyes sharp and cold. "Good morrow, keeper," he says, voice low and flat. "The Lord's tax is due." You nod, throat tight. "The harvest was poor this year," you say, voice barely a whisper. "We barely have enough for the hearth." He snorts, unimpressed. The Lord cares not for poor harvests, only for his coin. Outside, you hear the priest's bell tolling the morning mass, a sound that grates on your nerves like iron scraping stone. The priest's share is next, and he brings a different kind of weight. A weight heavy, with prayers, with promises. and with the silent threat of eternal damnation if you fail to pay. You step out to meet him, robes billowing, eyes sharp beneath the shadow of his hood. He holds out a leather pouch, heavy with silver, and you know that coin wasn't earned by honest hands. The tithe is a godly tax, he says, but you suspect it lines the church's coffers more than the poor's. Behind him, the villagers gather, watching with tired eyes. They whisper of the bailiff's last visit to the miller's wife, who had little to give. They whisper of the blacksmith whose cart was taken in lieu of payment. And they whisper of the fate worse than loss. The fate of a family torn apart when the bailiff's eyes linger too long on a daughter's smile. You swallow hard and turn back to the tavern, heart heavy. The day stretches before you, full of eyes watching, waiting. Every coin you take, every mug you fill, feels like walking a tightrope between survival and ruin. At noon, a group of travelers enters, their boots muddy, their faces weary. You pour them ale, keep your voice steady as they laugh and share stories. For a moment, the weight lifts. The tavern hums with life. But beneath the laughter, you count the coins. Know how little will remain once the taxes are paid. As dusk falls, the bailiff returns, this time with soldiers in tow. They come to inspect, to seize what's owed. You watch, helpless, as your barrels are measured, your casks counted, your stores inventoried. The ladle, the one you've used to serve countless mugs, is claimed, a small but bitter trophy of their greed. The soldiers leave with heavy carts, the bailiff's smirk burning in your mind. You're left with an empty hearth, empty barrels, and an aching emptiness where your pride once was. That night, you sit by the fire with your family, the flames flickering shadows on the walls. Your wife's hands tremble as she clutches a worn cloth. Your children's eyes are wide with fear and confusion. You promise them better days, even as the weight of the taxes, tithes, and the bailiff's shadow presses down, suffocating. You're wiping down the same worn wooden counter that's been stained by centuries of spilled ale, sweat, and curses. The faint light from a sputtering candle flickers across the crooked bottles, lining the shelf behind you, and the smell of damp straw mixed with stale beer clings to everything. The tavern's usual evening din, a jumble of drunken voices scraping stools and the occasional thud of a fist on the table, carries on as if oblivious to the approaching storm. Because tonight, the guild is coming. You know the guild's reputation well. They're the self-appointed overseers of tavern life, the arbiters of ale's worth, the rulers of the measure, and the judges of your soul. The guild's job is simple. Ensure taverns like yours pour true pints, serve honest fare, and keep their rowdy customers in line. But the truth? You're failing every single one of those tests, and you know it. There's no avoiding them. The knocking at your door sharpens the room's low murmur into a hush. It's deliberate, formal, a sound that carries the weight of authority, one you've learned to fear more than the drunken brawls or rat infestations. You take a deep breath. Smiling is your first defense. "Good evening, gentlemen," you say, voice steady, handing over a tankard of ale as the guild inspectors step inside. Their cloaks are dark, their eyes sharper than the knives hidden beneath their belts. They carry with them a kind of cold judgment that settles like a fog over the room. One of them, the tallest, steps forward. His gaze sweeps the room, pausing on your ale barrels and the cracked measuring cup sitting beside the counter. You smile wider. "Let's have a taste," he says. You pass him a cup, the ale darker and thicker than it should be, brewed with little more than recycled yeast and a hint of moldy grain. The truth is, your ingredients aren't what they used to be. Quality hops are expensive and rare. Water is drawn from the well that sometimes reeks of the nearby latrine. You've learned to stretch what you have, add a bit of bark for bitterness, a dash of old bread to add body. None of it tastes quite right, but you pray it's close enough to fool these men. He takes a sip and holds it, lips pursed. You see the slightest twitch of his nose, but he doesn't say anything. Instead, he turns to the second inspector, a smaller man with a notebook and a quill, who's already scribbling furiously. "They're skimping on the measure," the tall man says finally. "This cup holds a pint, but you pour just a half." You swallow hard, nodding with feigned innocence. "Just enough to keep the evening lively, sir. Full pints would empty my barrels by dawn." The smaller inspector snorts, eyes never leaving his notes. "Lively or greedy?" You give a quick smile, hoping it looks genuine. "Neither, I assure you. Business keeps this town alive. A little more ale in each cup means I keep my hearth warm." They move on, eyes inspecting everything. The grime in the corners, the crooked shelves, the sticky floor. One of them crouches to peer beneath the tables where the rats scuttle away in the shadows. Morality is the next measure they assess, and it cuts deeper. The guild isn't just about ale and measures. They police behavior too. They're tasked with stamping out debauchery, witchcraft, heresy, and anything else the local lords deem a threat. You know the stories. Taverns shut down because of too many late-night brawls. Women accused of sorcery for selling homemade remedies. Men hauled away for whispering treason over mugs of ale. You watch as the third inspector, a stern woman with eyes like flint, approaches the back room where the tavern wives often slip away with lovers, and the occasional bard hides to tune his lute. Her gaze sweeps the room and settles on you. You force a smile. "Any trouble tonight?" she asks, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the din. "None worth mentioning, mistress," you reply smoothly. "Just a few good folk enjoying their ale." She eyes you a moment longer, like a hawk sizing up its prey. Then, without a word, she moves on. The inspection feels endless, each moment a slow test of your wit and endurance. You explain the stale bread you use for stew as a traditional recipe. You tell them the odd scrape on the floor is character. The torn tapestry? An honest sign of the tavern's history. You lie with practiced ease because survival depends on it. In truth, you worry the guild's visit might mark the beginning of the end. If they discover the truth, the underfilled pints, the stretched ingredients, the whispered secrets, you'll lose your license, your livelihood, perhaps even your freedom. Outside, the tavern's usual chaos carries on, oblivious to the danger lurking within. You glance at the regulars, some of whom nod at you with eyes heavy from drink, others who smirk like they know exactly what's at stake. Finally, the guild convenes in the corner. You can hear snippets of their conversation. Words like fraud, shame, and penalty float through the haze of smoke and sweat. You clench your fists, but keep your face calm. After what feels like an eternity, the tallest inspector approaches. He looks you in the eye and says, "We'll be back." You nod, bowing your head slightly. You're always welcome here. The door shuts behind them with a heavy thud, and the tavern breathes again. The fire crackles, the voices rise, and the mugs clink. But inside, you're left with the cold reminder that every day is a tightrope walk between honesty and survival, between keeping the ale flowing and keeping the guild at bay. The chill in the air bites through your threadbare wool cloak, but the hearth's dying embers promise a little warmth soon enough. You shuffle to the brewing room, where the thick, familiar scent of malt and yeast waits for you like an old, stubborn friend. Today, the ale must be ready by noon. The regulars depend on it. Your livelihood hinges on the slow, steady bubbling in the vats and the deep brown foam rising like a promise. The fire in the flue crackles softly beneath the giant copper kettle, the blackened chimney whispering the day's start. Your hands are rough and steady, but even you know fire is a dangerous friend here, in this cramped, timber-walled world. You stir the brew gently, eyes on the flames licking the underside of the cauldron, making sure they don't get too eager. One stray ember, one careless flicker, and everything could change. You pause, the wooden spoon heavy in your palm. A knock on the door, then voices, noisy, rowdy, already drunk before midday. You curse under your breath. Let them wait. Today, the ale is your priority. But the fire, oh, the fire has other plans. A sudden flare, a hissing snap. The thatch above your head bursts into a searing glow. Heat slaps you like a fist. You spin, eyes wide, smoke filling your lungs, thick and bitter. The wooden beams groan, a sound like the death rattle of an ancient beast. You stumble, coughing, the taste of ash bitter on your tongue. "Fire!" you shout, voice rough and breaking. But in the common room, the patrons barely register. They're singing, laughing, clattering mugs, drunk enough to be deaf to danger. You grab a bucket of water and rush toward the inferno, heart hammering like a smith's hammer on an anvil. The flames dance just out of reach, taunting. You throw the water. It steams instantly, hissing, but the fire swallows it greedily, thriving on dry wood and old tar. You're desperate now, banging on barrels, grabbing anything that might hold liquid. Your skin stings where hot sparks kiss your arms. You hear a crash. The roof starting to give. Smoke thickens and your vision blurs. You know you can't stay. But how to save the ale? The barrels? The handful of coins you've scraped together after months of sweat and spilled sweat? You yell for help, but the drunken crowd only cheer louder, mistaking your panic for some sort of tavern game. Some rise, bleary-eyed, but their steps are slow, uncoordinated. The brawler at the back staggers forward, trips over a stool, and slams into the wall, sending a shower of sparks skyward. Your lungs burn. Your throat is raw. You grab what you can. Your apron, soaked and heavy, a wooden bucket, and a scorched bottle of wine. You shove the patrons out, shouting curses and prayers in equal measure. Out! Out! The house is burning! At last, a few sober enough to grasp the danger stumble to the door. You shove past them, choking, stumbling into the gray dawn. Outside, the village stirs. Dogs bark, Chickens scatter, and smoke curls skyward like the fingers of some vengeful spirit. The fire rages now, swallowing the tavern whole. The roof collapses with a thunderous crash, sending a shower of embers into the darkening sky. You stand at the edge of the smoldering ruin, sweat and soot streaking your face, your heart sinking with every crackle. Your livelihood, your home, your sanctuary, reduced to ash and smoke. You watch as neighbors gather, faces pale in the morning light, some offering words, others only pity. The reeve shakes his head, muttering about licenses and losses. The church bell tolls in the distance, a mournful sound for what's gone. You feel numb. The ale is lost, the barrels burned, your coins now nothing but warped metal in the fire's greedy mouth. But somehow, you breathe. You still stand. And that's something. The village will remember this day, the day your tavern almost died in fire. But so will you, because if there's one thing you've learned behind this bar, it's that the ale will be brewed again. The walls will rise, stronger this time. And the fire, fierce as it is, can't burn the spirit that keeps the tavern alive. So, you wipe the soot from your eyes, pull your cloak tighter, and step forward. The night's ashes will settle, and tomorrow, you start again. You wake with a groan somewhere between dawn and the crowing of the rooster, though the morning light sneaks through the cracks in the wooden shutters. Your head feels like it's been trampled by a dozen heavy boots, and the sharp ache behind your eyes is a cruel reminder of last night's ale. You didn't mean to drink so much, but the night's laughter, the clatter of mugs, and the bitter warmth of the brew all pulled you deeper into a fog you now wish you could forget. You sit up slowly, careful not to jolt the aching muscles in your neck, and shuffle toward the small table where you keep your modest collection of remedies. These are the tricks you've learned over years of tending this tavern, nursing your own kind through the aftermath of excess, and helping yourself to whatever can dull the lingering bite of the night before. First, there's the nettle tea. The dried leaves sit in a cracked earthenware pot, dark and bitter-smelling, like damp earth in early spring. You pour boiling water over a handful, watching the pale steam curl and drift into the cool morning air. You sip cautiously. The flavor is sharp and grassy, with a sting that almost clears your sinuses. They say nettle can purify the blood and ease headaches, but as you swallow, it mostly just makes you grimace. Next comes the pickled onions. You grab a small wooden bowl from the shelf, pulling out a handful of the pungent little bulbs, their skin shriveled and slick with vinegar. You nibble one cautiously, the sour tang stabbing your tongue and momentarily distracting you from your pounding skull. The acidity might be good for the stomach, or so you hope, but all you really notice is how it stings your mouth and makes your breath smell like a dung heap. You eye the goat's milk next, a rough, slightly sour liquid stored in a cracked ceramic jug. It's meant to soothe the belly and replenish what the ale has stolen, but as you lift the rim to drink, the taste is sharp and almost sour, like the remnants of the animals grazing on wild herbs in the hills. You manage a few swallows before setting the jug down with a sigh. None of these things are particularly pleasant, and none of them truly fix the weight that sits heavy on your chest and the throb behind your temples. But you keep at it, because these strange remedies, these humble cures, are what you have. And in the small world of the tavern, where stories flow as freely as ale, having a remedy to offer gives you a sort of authority. You might not know much about healing, but the nods of gratitude, the tired smiles from your customers, and the whispered thanks in the corners make it all worthwhile. As you clean the mugs and prepare for the day ahead, you can hear the faint clatter of boots outside, the bustle of town beginning to stir. Soon, you'll open your doors again, pouring ale for farmers, merchants, and soldiers alike, all of them carrying their own burdens, their own aches from the night before. You've learned to listen to their stories and to offer what little comfort you can. A warm seat by the fire, a strong brew, and the promise that whatever troubles the day may bring, the night will come again, and with it, the ale and the strange remedies that follow. So, before you rise fully to meet the day, you take one last sip of your nettle tea, grimace at the bitter taste, and settle back into the wooden chair. The world outside is waking up, but here, for just a few more moments, you let the quiet wash over you, and the strange, ancient ritual of hangover cures keep you company. Today, the world outside your tavern is swallowed by a white silence. The snow lies heavy, thick like a heavy woolen cloak thrown across the land, and the cold gnaws at your bones sharper than any blade. The roads that usually hum with the sound of carts, horses, and wandering souls are utterly still, sealed tight by frost and ice. No travelers will come this day. No coin will change hands. Your breath steams in the chill air as you light the hearth, coaxing life from the blackened wood. The fire sputters and snaps, sending flickering shadows across the rough stone walls, but the warmth barely pushes back the cold that seeps in through the cracks and crevices. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders and move to check the barrels. The ale inside has begun to freeze at the edges, a cruel reminder that even the simplest pleasures are scarce this time of year. You cross to the kitchen where the last of the stale bread sits on a rough-hewn table, hard as a stone and twice as unforgiving. It has been days since the miller came through with fresh flour, the snow trapping more than just travelers. You gnaw at a dry crumb, your teeth crunching against the unyielding crust, and swallow the meager meal with a cup of lukewarm water drawn from a cracked jug. Outside, the wind howls a mournful tune, rattling the shutters and sending a scattering of snowflakes through the tiniest cracks in the windows. You pull a threadbare blanket tighter over the thin straw mattress in the corner. Your bed, your refuge, your only companion on these long, empty nights. The cold is relentless, a living thing that creeps beneath your cloak and bites at your fingers and toes until they're numb. You move back to the bar, your hands stiff and clumsy as you attempt to stir the fire back to life with a handful of kindling. The smell of smoke mingles with the sharp bite of frost, a bitter perfume that clings to your clothes and skin. The thought of a warm ale served to a weary traveler is a distant memory, now just a whisper of better days, lost beneath the winter's grip. Hours pass with a dull, creeping ache in your joints and the heavy silence of an empty room. No laughter, no arguments, no clinking of mugs, only the wind's endless lament and the occasional creak of settling timbers. You pace the floor, restless and watchful, your eyes fixed on the door that refuses to open. The sun arcs low and pale behind a blanket of slate-gray clouds, casting a cold, muted light across the frozen streets. In another season, you might have packed the tavern with the warmth of firelight, the murmur of conversation, the soft laughter of friends and strangers alike. But tonight, there is nothing but the empty promise of coin you will never see. Night falls with an icy finality. You stoke the fire one last time and settle onto your straw mattress, your body aching with cold and loneliness. You imagine the road beyond the walls, buried beneath snowdrifts, and the travelers stranded in their own homes, just like you, waiting for spring's thaw to break the prison of winter. As your eyes grow heavy, the cold stills your breath and tugs at your fingers, but you find some small comfort in the thought that the world will warm again, that the laughter will return, the doors will swing open, and your tavern will once again be a beacon for all those seeking refuge from the long, dark nights. The cold hits you before dawn, slipping in through the cracks around the door and creeping under the heavy wooden shutters. You wake in your small room above the tavern to the sound of wind scraping against the roof, howling like a pack of starving wolves outside. Snow has fallen all night, deep and unyielding. The roads, once muddy and treacherous, are now sealed tight beneath a thick white blanket. No carts, no foot traffic, no way for travelers or locals to reach you. You rise slowly, feet touching the frozen wooden floor, your breath fogging in the cold air. The fire in the hearth is nothing but ash and bitter memories, long since smothered to save precious firewood. You reach for your cloak, thick and worn, but it barely holds back the chill that settles in your bones. Downstairs, the tavern sits silent, empty, the flickering shadows cast by the early dawn barely stirring the dust on tables and benches. The hearth's blackened stones look mournful without the dance of flames. Barrels of ale, once lively with the promise of warmth and good cheer, have hardened into icy tombs. You know the frosted edges around the tap mean they won't pour for days, maybe weeks. You shuffle to the counter, your fingers stiff and cracked, grimacing at the cold wood. Your hands ache. The sting of winter is relentless, a constant reminder of your lonely vigil. No coins have clinked here in days. No hearty voices echo through these walls. The winter has locked out the world, and with it, your livelihood. You stare at the cold bread wrapped in linen on the shelf, a few hard loaves left over from last week. You break a piece off, the crust snapping sharply, and chew slowly, the stale crumbs gritty on your tongue. It's not much, but it's what you have. The usual stew bubbling in the cauldron downstairs is long gone, replaced by the cold echo of empty pots and quiet desperation. Outside, the wind whistles through the narrow streets of your village. The few souls who remain huddle near their own hearths, eyes wary and faces drawn tight against the cold. Even the children have disappeared, tucked away under multiple blankets, their laughter buried beneath the weight of winter's silence. You wonder how long you can last like this. The debts on the tavern still hover like vultures, owed to the miller, the brewer, the local reeve who expects his share regardless of your empty rooms. No matter the cold, the hunger, or the silence, the demands keep coming. You step outside briefly, the snow crunching beneath your boots, each breath a sharp cloud of frost. The village looks almost peaceful, covered in white, but it's a stillness born from hardship, not rest. The wooden sign above your door swings on creaking hinges, its paint peeling and faded. The name you once shouted proudly now feels like a distant memory. Back inside, you try to coax a spark from the flint and steel by the hearth, but your fingers fumble, numb and unsteady. Finally, a tiny ember catches, a fragile hope in the gray dawn. You blow gently, watching the flame grow, small but alive. For a moment, it warms you, inside and out. You pour yourself a cup of warm water, no ale to be found, and sip slowly, letting the heat trickle down your throat. You lean against the counter and gaze around your empty tavern, imagining the rowdy crowds you used to host. The brawl in the corner, the bard's drunken song, the clink of tankards, the firelight flickering on smiling faces, all vanished under the heavy blanket of snow and silence. Outside, the storm will rage for days yet, but inside, you hold your vigil, keeper of cold barrels and colder nights. You're the last flame in a frozen world, waiting for spring's thaw, waiting for footsteps on the road, waiting for life to return. Until then, the snow falls, the wind howls, and you keep the fire burning. The heavy wooden door slams shut behind the last stumbling patron, and a sudden hush descends over the tavern. No more laughter, no more shouting, no more clinking mugs filling the air. You're finally alone. At least, that's what you think. The warmth of the hearth has faded to a dull glow, and the smoke lingers thick as you pull a rough wool cloak tighter around your shoulders. Your bones ache from hours spent hauling barrels, pouring ale, and dodging fistfights you didn't start, but always end up in. You take a deep breath, but it's a bitter mix of stale beer, damp straw, and something sharp. Maybe the copper tang of spilled blood from the last brawl. You reach for a ragged mop leaning against the wall, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of use. There's blood on the floor. Not much, but enough. It seeps dark and sticky between the wide planks, a reminder of the night's violence. Your boots squelch as you press down, dragging the mop through the grime. You curse under your breath, wishing you had better tools, better hands, better luck. You think of the young lad who threw the first punch, how the burly mercenary answered back, how a chair leg cracked and sent someone crashing to the ground. No one got seriously hurt, but you're certain you'll find bruises and cuts by morning, and maybe a bleeding lip or two. It's your job to clean up, to make the place ready again, no matter what. With slow, steady strokes, you mop the floor, each pass dragging the sticky mess closer to the corner where the dogs gnaw on old bones. They're restless tonight, whining low and twitching in their straw beds. You toss a scrap their way, and their tails thump in thanks. They'll keep the rats at bay, at least for now. But the work isn't done. Your eyes catch a shattered wooden shutter hanging crooked on rusty iron hinges. The wind howls outside, rattling the tavern walls, as if to remind you that winter is coming. You grab a hammer from the workbench, nails from a battered box, and set to fixing the broken panel. The wood splinters under your hands. It's old and dry, as worn as you feel. Outside, the moon is a pale silver slice, barely lighting the muddy road. You pause for a moment, listening to the lonely hoot of an owl and the distant howl of a wolf. The town sleeps, but the wild doesn't. Your breath steams in the cold air as you hammer, each thud echoing in the quiet night. Back inside, the chores keep piling. You shuffle to the back where the chickens roost, their feathers ruffled and dusty. They cluck softly, pecking at the spilled grain you scatter on the dirt floor. Feeding them is another necessary task. They're your breakfast and your insurance, after all. You don't know how many winters you've survived by trading eggs for coin or fresh meat. The tavern feels emptier than ever tonight, though it's never truly empty. Shadows shift and dance along the stone walls, cast by the flicker of a lone candle you set on the shelf. You swear you hear whispers in the dark, the murmurs of past patrons, of forgotten secrets and broken promises. The silence presses heavy, yet something unseen fills the room. Memories you can't shake. You make your way to the brewing barrel, peering into the murky depths. Tomorrow, you'll have to start again. Boiling water, steeping hops, and coaxing life from the stubborn yeast. Brewing is a slow and delicate art, but it keeps the ale flowing, and the patrons coming back. Without it, the tavern is just four walls and a roof. You wipe your hands on a grimy cloth, muscles aching. The hours have been long, and the nights even longer. There's a cold ache behind your eyes, a whisper of regret for all the things you can't change, the debts unpaid, the arguments lost, the bruises you didn't prevent. A creak from the ceiling makes you glance up. The rafters groan under the weight of years, and somewhere a rat scurries unseen. You imagine the creatures weaving through the darkness, finding shelter where you barely can. They are your silent roommates in this fragile shelter. You stretch your back, feeling the stiffness settle deep into your joints. You think of the day's customers, the gruff farmers, the wandering minstrels, the occasional noble, too drunk to know better. They came hungry, thirsty, searching for warmth and company. You gave them what you had, even when it wasn't much. The candle flickers low, and you extinguish it with a sigh. The room sinks into shadows once more. You move to the corner, grabbing a blanket and crawling into the small loft above the main room, your bed for the night. Straw and threadbare cloth hold you just above the ground, a fragile barrier against the cold. You lie back, staring up at the rough timber beams, and let your thoughts wander. The tavern sleeps around you, but your mind races through memories, the laughter, the fights, the fleeting smiles of strangers who found refuge here. You wonder if they think of you when they're gone, or if you are just another shadow lost in their blurred memories. The night deepens, and your breathing slows. Outside, the wind moans through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of wood smoke and earth. You close your eyes and drift between waking and dreaming, caught between the life you live and the life you might have had. You wake before dawn, cold and aching. The day begins again with a creaking door, the murmur of voices, and the clatter of mugs. You push yourself up, ready to face another round of spills, secrets, and stories. Because this tavern is your world, your burden, and your home. And no matter the regrets, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Thanks for listening. If you're already asleep, great. We've successfully lulled you to sleep. And if you're still awake, well, that's impressive. If you genuinely enjoy these boring stories about history, feel free to subscribe to our channel whenever you're in the mood. Sleep well, and good night.